First question I suppose you might ask is, why is a guy from an airport here? You'll find out that a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about has similar characteristics across all industries. I presented to universities, to museums, to data centers, to transportation groups. And funny thing is we all tend to have the same issues, or let's just say problems, right? So when we started this project in Denver, we had a very simple edict from the owner. I was essentially an extension of staff. I wasn't brought on to do this project. I was a project manager, and they said, hey, anybody know how to do BIM? And I said, yeah, okay. They said, we heard BIM can talk to FM. And I said, I think so. He said, okay, do that. So serendipity said that was allowing us to essentially do the project without, let's just say an unfettered process to get to the client what it is that he really wanted. So there's some fortune in having a client that's willing to do that for you. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about the airport. So this is what everyone tells other people from the airport about the airport. We're fabulous, right? We're 53 million passengers a year, 5th busiest airport in the US, 24-hour, 365-day operation. You can read it, right? Okay, you guys can do the translation to the 53 square miles, 137 square kilometers. We have 6 active airfields currently, and we have the ability to build 12. I think Melbourne has 3, right? So just as a scale, we're very fortunate that we have a lot of territory, okay? Fortunate that we have the ability to expand, but it also is difficult to manage large areas of land and the associated assets that go with it. And the facilities, I mean, for us, that's a lot of square footage. And that's in about, well, roughly 40 buildings across the airport, okay? So that's what we tell everybody. This is what we don't tell everybody, okay? Let's just be honest. This is the issues that we run into, right? We have poor or no as-builts. Anybody here have that issue? Come on, it's true. As-built is the worst term ever came up with because it's never as-built. It's a version slightly kind of, somebody gave you a this, or they took the designer's drawing and did one of these, or put a red line on it and said, it's as-built, okay. I'm not bagging on the industry. That's how we've, as an industry, have grown up. In fact, you'll get an owner to write a check for an as-built at the end of a project with a begrudging smile, but a smile. But then at the beginning of the next project, because nobody trusts the as-built, he'll write another check for another as-built to be done so that you can start the project. Is that insanity or what, right? Okay, so this is efficiencies in a process that we saw as a problem. 9 million CAD files to date. That is not a joke. And it's in a sort of ginormous bucket because nobody thought about how to organize the information, right? When this airport was first built, it was right at the transition from hand drawing to CAD. So the other impetus for this process of developing a BIM standard for the airport was, we didn't have that when they started the building, the original construction, and that was part of the reason why they have this 9 million CAD files in a big bucket. So they said, we need to be able to do a better job of organizing what we do and how we get it from our consultants. So as a result, we have a dysfunctional maintenance program, right? Lack of information going in. How does it get to the maintenance folks? You guys submit a set of fabulous drawings and specifications, and they get stuck on a shelf or on a pile or on a CD or on a thumb drive or all kinds of media, right? And then somebody in the organization on the other side does this. So all the information that you gave is coming through a filter that someone has to do probably in their spare time to input into an information system that's supposed to run a facility. It doesn't work very well. Cross-departmental silos and redundancies. So this is politics, right? One group wants one thing one way, one group wants something another way. Turns out that group's doing the same thing that that group's doing, but in a different way. Problem. Subjective budget justification. Because that group and that group have 2 agendas, to do essentially kind of the same thing, they're battling each other, right? So constant effort in trying to get people to say, I need true metrics to prove my case. Now, believe me, BIM doesn't solve a lot of this political stuff, but it starts to address some of those issues, which leads to incomplete financial picture, right? We talked to our finance folks, and they said, we said, what's the current valuation of the airport today? Well, the funny thing was, it was within 15 to 20% of the original cost of the facility. It's 20 years older. How could that possibly be? They're using some funny math. But truthfully, again, not their fault, because they don't get good information coming from the work that's being done on the facility to improve that process, right? No vertical to horizontal integration. That means civil and all things vertical, which you think people would pay more attention to, especially when you go to take a drilling rig and you're going to go put it here. Your as-built say, the pipe did this, so I'm going to go here. Oops, bad as-built. Turns out that pipe was right there. How many of those situations happen that cost owners significant amount of money that had they managed the front end of that data collection process better, save a lot of money and headaches? And heck, when you're at an airport and somebody accidentally digs up a data line that will shut down the airport, not necessarily drop airplanes out of the sky, but theoretically has that capability because the data lines have been cut because somebody said it was supposed to be 6 feet below grade and it turned out to be 6 inches. So what you guys do, even as a systems, from mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, is critical that we know where it is. Inconsistent naming, that has to do with data sets and how you convey the information from the construction on the vertical and horizontal side to the facilities management side. If you don't have a like language for location information, then you're going to hand them something that they're going to have to translate every time. What if you could align those so it's exactly how the owner wants and needs it? Okay. I'm going to say one caveat at this point, and that is I'm speaking from the standpoint of a large facility owner that will be building over years and years. So it's a different aspect than necessarily a commercial builder who builds a building and goes. More like maybe a hospital where they build and they're going to stay for a while. So just please understand that that's where I'm coming from in this commentary. So we said, what's the first thing we need to do to start this process for a team to deliver this technology, right? So I know it's on a cloud, but it's not really in a cloud. That was just a graphic that was done that way. But ironically, today it's being done on a cloud. This is actually a 5-year-old graphic. So the team is working, doing design, doing the BIM process offsite. Okay, we don't do anything at the airport itself. It's being done by the consultants and essentially developed with all the great standards that are being put forward. And I have to say, I really do appreciate your guys' group and moving forward and developing an industry standard for Australia and the region here, because I wish we had this in the States. It is unfortunately been very much a drag on the process. More people blame the MEP BIM process for lack of standardization, therefore don't make us do it in our market, than anything else. And what you guys have shown here in the last day or so has blown that completely out of the water. So I do say congratulations to the group as a whole, and I mean that wholeheartedly. So we said, we understand it. In this process here, we're going to have designers and engineers that are developing information that needs to come to the airport. As the airport, they need to find a way that they're going to collect the information in a way that's going to be consistent, right? So if you have a standard, a schema of sorts, right, then you can take this information, put it into a database that allows you to collect that information. So we said, that's a good step. Nobody had this product, so we kind of developed it, right? Wasn't significant, it was just enough that it was going to get the project moving. But what we found is that as a result of that, we had a much more, we were easily facilitating the ability to plug in all these other pieces. I would show you all the cool little building, 4D and 5D schedules that we did for this project. But I don't have enough time to go through all that. But it looks a lot like the cool ones you guys did, just maybe not so many of the fly-through video ones. I want to know who's got that budget in their project. But, I want to point out something. This is kind of a term that was coined during this project. I'm calling it CXDMA. So CX in the States stands for commissioning. I don't know if you guys have the same acronym here. But the DMA is Data Management Authority. So it's not just commissioning of the equipment, but it's the commissioning of the information coming from the commissioning that needs to go to the facilities management side. That is the single most important phase and data upload and collection of the entire construction process when it comes to the owner to be able to have information to move forward to manage their building. It's not just turning the lights on and off and say, yes, it works or it doesn't work, right? It's what was the power draw, what's the requirement, who's the manufacturer, all that other stuff. That gets collected in that phase. So in the airports, we deal heavily with GIS. If you guys are familiar with GIS or not, I don't know, but GIS is a tremendous tool for being able to accumulate and manage large bits of data. So when you have 53 square miles of airport or campuses or anything large, you need a robust database system that can handle the information. But it stays robust and handling that information by keeping things pared down to their absolute minimums. So you're not going to ever take a Revit file and push it into GIS because it doesn't want all that graphic information. It just wants the data, right? So similar to the entry for facility management, the GIS data entry has often been the fat finger approach. Now, granted, there's a 7-step QA, QC process to make sure that people don't make mistakes on that. But I can tell you, world-renowned consultants have come to the doors of Denver and have shown up and delivered information that said a glycol recovery pond, so the de-icing fluid, was shown on a map, and they identified it as a black sand beach. So that's obviously you have an analyst looking at data that he's not familiar with. What if the data was coming from the experts in the program that actually populate that drawing, right? So if you have a mechanical engineer populating mechanical information, if you have a civil engineer populating civil information, do you think your level of quality is going to go up? They're already doing it. Every time they give you a drawing, it's usually that guy who's giving you that information. So you're not paying for it twice. So what if you pull it in as part of your normal process? There may be some incremental costs here and there, but initially that's a small hurdle, but over time the payback is tremendous. Again, making data flow through the process by just doing what you do already, but doing it in a way that is consistent and is trackable. So all that led to, all right, Maximo is our CMMS flavor of choice. It's IBM's product. It's one of the big behemoths on the planet, and anything that IBM touches is a behemoth, right? It does everything. It slices it, dices it, juliennes, right? But what it doesn't do very well is take information in. You have that guy doing this, right? Yes, you can take Excel pushes and that kind of thing, but you can't take full programs of information in Excel spreadsheets, or you can try it, but I can tell you out of experience it's a fail, okay? So if you build a system that's populating this as part of your deliverables every time, you're doing your engineering, you're doing your design, but you're just doing it in a format that's consumable for the owner. So the owner gets bang for the buck twice, right? So that's where those efficiencies start coming not only for the owner, but then also for your guys' teams in the long haul, because you have the authorship that gives that information to the client. So all of this leads to the living as built, right? The worst thing that happens is when the project or a part of a project is done and people drop it and run, and then the owner's left there going, well, what about, and how does it connect to, and who comes back and pushes it back into the rest of the building, makes those connections? Well, it's not part of our scope. So somebody's left to do that. And is it important? If you're the consultant that has to come in to project B following project A, and you have all this disparate stuff all over the place, not connected to everything else, doesn't your workload go up? Doesn't your risk go up? Doesn't the cost of the ownership go up? To nobody's benefit, right? So the living as-built, I know you guys are all looking at me like it's a panacea, it's never going to happen. But from an ownership side, that is so key. We have to find a way to deliver that so people can actually do it and achieve it as part of their day-to-day business. So we started off with doing a set of standards, and I won't, obviously, this is page 1. All right. So the key to the standards is obviously, what is it we're asking you guys to provide? So we said, yeah, well, here's all the technical stuff, and here's all the how-tos and the whys. But the real key for us was, come on, all right. The first part of the integration at DIA was to take advantage of the information model to feed into existing and future facility maintenance systems. Again, there's that sort of super simple caveat. But why? Okay? They wanted to be more productive. They wanted to have a preventative maintenance program that was working. They want to advance their sustainability, their schedulable maintenance, and their predictable behavior, because that's where the cost is to the owner. Okay? I can't say this enough. Sometimes we focus too much on the deliverable of the building itself, when at the end in mind is to have an ownership that would like to have you come back because you're making his life easier, and you did a good design, not just did a good design. So the bar is getting raised, and more owners are going to start saying, well, not only do I want to make sure I'm getting this information, but I want to make sure the information is good. Simple example, you guys have probably all seen this before, but basically the 3 flavors of BIM that have been historically delivered. This comes from a contractor in the United States, and he kind of mapped out, so just to say this, metrics and cost and dollars relative to BIM and the ROI. How many owners come to you and say, give me the ROI for your, to use BIM? How do you tell them that the return comes from the money you didn't spend? And the only way to say that you would have spent money is in what are the potential failures, change orders, RFIs, right, through a project. So you have to do some sort of a historical analysis. So kind of this is what that is. So he says, all right, regular 2D projects. Of the projects that he had done in the magnitude of 143 million worth of project, they had 18.42% of cost overrun. That's really not a fair graphic, because it should be the pie plus the 18.42% slice, because it wasn't part of the original pie, let me tell you. And then 3D Lonely BIM was when you had either the designer, or usually in this case, most often, it was the contractor that was using BIM. The change order and the values started to change, right, so that it was down to 11.1. And then, of course, the goal is to get to the point where everyone's using things together, right? And historically, it came to a 2.68% change order. So dramatic differences right there, right? That's as close to a living metric as you can kind of point to say, okay, based on how we used to do it and based on how we do it now. So this is a metric that people have talked about in the past and said, okay, well, the International Facility Management Association says 25% of the building's budget goes towards the design and construction of a building, and 75% goes to the rest, the life of the building, right? So it makes sense. It's just that normally the 25% happens in a peak, and then the 75% happens over time. Now, at the airport, we said, well, I'm not sure that we can really buy into that, because the truth is, this is based on the median lifespan of a typical office building, which is 73 years according to the U.S. Energy Department of Energy, yes. But an airport is a 24/7 facility, 365 operation. So you can't use that same metric. An office building's open roughly 8 to 5 days a week-ish, right? So we said it's really more like an 80% savings. So again, you guys are the 20%, sorry. Doesn't mean that your value is getting any less. It's just saying that the value of what it is you're bringing to the table is actually more. Because what you do and how you do it and how you document it and deliver it to the owner is what's going to drive their efficiencies. So real quickly, this is essentially kind of the roadmap that we've given to the airport. It says, okay, we know that in the design phases, these are essentially the formats of choice. ArchiCAD didn't really make the cut because it just wasn't enough within the industry to create its own standard within there. So we just said, you know what? We don't care how you model. You can model using, Play-Doh and hot dogs, but at the end you have to give it to us in this format. So sort of a backhanded mandated software, but some people will still do it the other way. Or the ironic one where someone will do it by hand and hand it to a guy to do it in BIM. To me, that's as dumb as hot dogs and Play-Doh. It is the tool, right? So over time, we will get there, and I'm not trying to disparage the guys who have been around. I'm 50 years old. I was, on the boards, vellum and pens and paper and everything else, understanding that process. But it's the real value of that tool comes when the designer is using it himself, not using a draftsman. Because he's the guy who's got the smarts, right? He's the one who knows the answer without having to basically somehow write it on a piece of paper and give it to someone else to ask, hoping he asks the question. So the next step in this process was, okay, yeah, we're going to collect this information and we're going to bring it to this normalized data hub, right? It's a database, guys. It's not rocket science. In fact, when we first started this process, nobody was doing this. To date, we are finding there are more people offering something like this. We are still using the ones that we have developed, but just to let you know that this is a process that's starting to be adopted, and actually products are being developed for. I don't know if anybody is aware of, well, I won't get into the program that I was going to talk about, but there are other programs out there that are starting to do this, right? So because we want to collect this information through the design and the construction process again, so that we can get that 20% of that life cycle cost. But where we really want to go to is, once you have that information, yeah, you built it, and well done, but the real value is, what can you do with this downstream? What if you can share it with a CMMS? What if you can share it with your GIS? What if you can utilize it as part of your building management systems? Heck, what if it contacted and actually spoke with the finance? Right? Ooh, that's scary stuff. Now, I'll be honest in telling you, this is the slowest drag in trying to get adopted at the airport, because the finance people are like, no, you can't tell us what it is that we know. It'll take time. But the time that will take is for them to understand and start to realize when they're getting good information, they'll start to trust it more. When your owners or contractors or whoever you guys are contracted to start getting good information from you, they trust you more. So the reality is, that's the 80%. That's the value. Input once over there, utilize multiple times over here, right? Your guys' job doesn't change a whole lot. But when somebody says, hey, we're going to develop this template, and we'd like to add a few of these pieces for facilities management in there, please do it. It's worth a lot downstream. So, simple, stupid graphic, and it is merely a graphic. This is not really representing any budget at the airport. But hey, do we want reactive budgeting, or do we want predictive budgeting, right? So the information we're collecting is the installation date of X, and who did it, And, oh, wait a second, what about warranty? How many owners come out to a job site and say, well, I just started today, so therefore this piece of equipment just started a warranty now, right? How many of those pieces, the warranty started ticking when it arrived on the job site? Or when the guy peeled the plastic off? Or when it got hooked up the first time, right? And how surprised is that owner when he goes, what do you mean my warranty's already out and the project hasn't even started yet? Oh, no worries, we'll give you an extended warranty. Okay, that's fine. Still more money out of pocket. But single most significant dollar loss in a project's development of stupid money is lost warranties. Tracking them, collecting them, maintaining them, right? At the airport, we had a relatively new generator, a $1 million generator, and it one day blew up. Maintenance said, that's still under warranty. They looked up their warranty and they said, yes, it is still under warranty. They called the manufacturer and the manufacturer said, we'll be right away, out there right away. They showed up and they said, it is under warranty, and the first thing it says is, please show me your maintenance records. And the maintenance guy said, oh, I didn't read that. Guess who wrote a check? So, stupid, simple information. It has to get conveyed, right? And do you think the owner may blame somebody upstream that gave them the information or didn't give them the information? You're damn right. Even though it was their bad, they're still going to find someone to blame and get mad at. It's not that they're going to go sue them necessarily, but it's frustrating. Frustrating money, right? So, and I'll just tell you what's building in the background here is the model of the existing building. So we had two projects going simultaneously. One was the development of a new hotel and transit center. So we have a train coming from downtown out to the airport now. Well, once it's done in 2016. And then a 500-plus room hotel that was built at the end. So if you guys ever drive or fly to Denver, you'll know what that new construction was. But that project was the easy one, because essentially it was quasi-greenfield, right? Start from scratch, new standards, new process, new deliverable, still have to manage it, but it came across the way we wanted it. The hard part is the existing stuff, right? Crappy or no as-built, we already talked about that. But you know what? When we look at this building, and you guys look at this model and you say, good God, how horrible is this, right? We did this building, approximately 12 million square feet of the 20, in about 60 days for $40,000 to the extent necessary to develop the systems to get populated. So what's the most important thing for the owner? Does he care about the doors and the doorknobs and that kind of stuff? That's way, way down here. He cares about his systems, right? What's the lifeblood? That's you guys, right? Mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems. What will make a customer more angry at an airport than a broken toilet? You try to go to the bathroom coming right off the plane and it says, sorry, no can do, we're broken. You're an angry customer, right? And guess what? Airports are in a competitive business, so they have to keep people happy. So I'm guessing you might have a couple ownerships that you guys work for that are in a competitive business that have to keep their people happy as well. Whether they're tenants in a building, owners long-term, short-term, the whole 9 yards, right? So we said, we're just going to focus on the buckets. So all of those are basically rooms, and the room only needed a location and a space. At that point, we could start allocating assets to those spaces. So facility management isn't rocket science, but it needs those two things. It needs a location, and it has to be a unique one. So speaking of that, we had umpteen architects do the original construction of this building, and they had architect A had his building, and it started with A101, 102, 103, and then the architect B had his building, it started off with A101, 102, 103. Can't have the same name of the same location and the same facility twice. Databases don't like that, right? So we literally had to create a whole new naming convention for a facility to make it work. So when you guys do your standards, and you move and you start a project with a client now, you're already doing the very same thing. Because if you have, can you have redundant room names in Revit? It has some unique value somewhere, doesn't it? Revit has a unique ID for every space. Whether you choose to expose it or not, whether you choose to put it into your naming convention or not, but it is a unique value. Because in Revit, what's in the background? It's a database, and it has to manage those things uniquely. So that was part of the whole impetus for why we were doing what we were doing. So as a side benefit to this was, not only do we have the ability to put stuff into the database, but then once we connected to these other systems, some of the systems we could actually have report back to the database and repopulate the model. We're not telling you we're going to auto-draw the model, but data gets pushed back. I replaced that toilet, manufacturer X, for manufacturer Y. I can push that information back to the model if I want to. In some cases, that's valuable because you might want to know, performance over time, and when you go in to do a renovation or an addition, what things have changed. It's probably more valuable if you had a rooftop unit, right? And that changed. And maybe the location for the access panel or the power draw was different. That kind of stuff starts having an effect on your model if you're thinking of it as a living as-built, right? So it's all about this shared knowledge. Have the ability to have current and future projects sort of running and gunning at the same time. We have so again, back in the background of this thing, so that rudimentary model that you saw still yields a floor plan that most anybody can use. That's the same model, right? So guess what? Our maintenance guy can look at that and go, oh, I know where that is. And then you can overlay all the systems information on top of that. Oh, I know where that is, okay? Running joke at the airport was the maintenance guy is the guy doing this, right? And we know why? Because he didn't know where it is, right? One day, we'll get to the little viewer thing, and please, 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 steer away from the Star Wars technology development, and I say this to both the engineering groups and other suppliers that are out there. There's been tried and failed attempts at doing, the super duper 3D model walkthrough guy. Oh, well, all the guy has to do is touch on the lamp and it'll tell him what is. It scares the maintenance people to death. Give them something that they're used to seeing and touching. It could be a digital representation of a plan. And guess what? That's still a plan. But we know the data that's in the background makes that plan smarter. So now it has the ability to use the information, but not scare them to death, right? We had a kind of a running joke because we had one of our clients initially said, how are we supposed to submit this information for permit? I said, what do you mean? Well, how do we hand over a model? So I'm thinking, okay, this is a joke, right? This is going to be funny. She said, do we have to give them like BIM goggles? I kid you not. And I said, who have you been talking to? Oh, well, the manager of this project, I ran up there right away and said, it prints out on paper, okay? It prints out on paper. Stamp it, we're good. But those kinds of little stories spin out. And you have a client that goes, oh my God, how are we supposed to hand some holographic model to the jurisdiction? It's amazing how much people get blown away by the stuff that we're all laughing, right? There's a lot of people out there that just had no better idea. And on the one hand, they want to believe that that stuff is available, but on the other hand, if it really affects them directly, they don't want to touch it. So beware of the charlatans, right? Integrated BIM with GIS. So I talked about GIS as being sort of like the mega data handler, okay? I think that we will start to see in relative short order, 3 to 5 years, a integration, especially if you have campus type environments, where you have BIM documentation on a facility by facility basis, but then you have to connect that information to other buildings. And so when I mean campus, it could be any set of buildings, it could be global. It's going to be connected by GIS information, pulling in from BIM information. GIS is a data sucker. It does not create information. It has to have information to work. Where is that information coming from? Data authoring tools like Revit, BIM. That's where it's coming from. So again, what you guys do has a higher and higher value every day. So lastly, we talk about total cost of ownership for these projects because, I mean, it's kind of it's a phrase, but it's really what drives the business for our clients. Because at the end of the day, they want to be able to know not only what the capital improvement projects are with the bright and shiny and the new, which again, those are the easy ones, but it's how do you manage that over time. Anything that you think about doing has to be maintained. And I'm not talking about a piece of equipment being maintained. I'm talking about as-built being maintained, documentation being maintained, right? Because otherwise it's just a snapshot in time, and the owner will have to go back and write another check somewhere down the road to do a, I don't know, conditions assessment or whatever that may be, okay? Now, all that stuff is still going to live and still be valuable to an owner is doing conditions assessments, but why not populate it into something that's going to continue to live for him, and then eventually, probably for you guys, if you show up on the project and you can say, I can trust this information. Now I can actually start, not spend the first 10 to 15% of my budget trying to figure out what's there or what's not there. Wait, this wasn't on the drawing. So, is Dominic here? I was so proud of my, what did you call it? The wheel of death? All right. So, okay, so on all programs I've ever seen, it's always some sort of a life cycle, you know, the circle of life, and he turned it into the wheel of death. And I get it, though. Hackneyed as it may be, people use it and use it and use it. So, yes, my company has a wheel of death. And we offer all of these things. But until we had a program such as this, we didn't have ways to stitch the pieces together, right? So, worldwide organization, we have all, 45,000 people, about to jump to about 90 worldwide. And we still weren't good at the pieces in between. Okay, so we're developing this internally just as much as we are for our clients at the same time. So I'm going to jump through this process relatively quickly, and another wheel to talk about kind of the process. A lot of this stuff is pretty simplified for you guys because you're technicians in most of this, but I will go through it anyway for those in the room that aren't. When we start a process or a project, we start with existing information. So these are some of those as-built conditions. We want to know where our starting point is. If we don't have it, we have to generate it. The next step is always in saying, okay, what am I going to do with the information? Means, what information do I want, right? So this is a version of essentially an execution plan of sorts, right? You guys, everyone's familiar with an execution plan, right? Please? Okay, thank you. I think this is the single best tool that was ever manifested in a process, because before contracts were written verbiage, and I mean that as verbal garbage, to try to explain what it is that you want the owner to have to be given by the contractor as designed by the engineer. Guess what? Never quite matched. At the end of the day, there was sort of a handshake or a nudge that said, okay, yeah, it's close enough. This is so much better than that, so much better than that. So execution plans are key to literally connecting the contract to the documents. And yeah, there's a lot of hair on how you explain what a level of development is, et cetera, but at least it's a next step in evolution. So the next step to that is, okay, we're going to be designing our projects, right? So in the initial design phases, you see, okay, well, there's this much information that's being populated by the engineer, right? So the person who's the expert, the subject matter expert on this particular thing, mechanical engineer. And this is what I'm hoping to see. I haven't seen your guys' template, so I apologize. I don't know where you are in it, but again, we're hoping that kind of information, and yes, if you scroll down, you'll see a whole lot more, the tons of parameters that come from your guys' industry is the information necessary to make a building run. Okay, it's the mechanical, it's the electrical, it's the plumbing. And sure, there's life safety and some other stuff, but really, this is the lifeblood. This is the muscle, this is the tissue, this is the air. So my point is, you only input the information that you as that expert for that particular phase of the project need to input. So it's probably performance criteria in the design phase, correct? So as you're moving forward, though, you know that that same element, and yes, graphically, it's still 2D for all of you guys who are wanting the BIM goggles. I really do have a set of goggles I have on my desk, and I've played a prank on a couple of people that said those are BIM goggles. Oh, long story, anyway. So the next phase is okay, through the design process, we said, we're going to collect this information, and we're going to bring it in as part of the way we do business, right? But some of the next pieces are, where are we collecting information in the commissioning phase? So commissioning phase is we're starting to now take the information that was done from the designer and then show a baseline as-built condition in space, right, in the place. Because if you don't have that baseline and you're referring to manufacturer spec as the basis of performance, somebody's going to be angry at you because it's not where it should be. Well, it's never at the manufacturer, well, okay, sometimes never. It's rarely at the manufacturer's peak performance level that's in their documentation. There's a delta in there somewhere, right? So you want to know day one what it was so that day 100, am I still within spec? This is that data collection point. We've been talking about some different tools, BIM 360 Field, BIM 360 Glue, and using some of those tools. That's not what you're looking at right here, but that's essentially where we've started to migrate to, just for the simplicity of it. There's been some discussion about tracking information from the drawings, or sorry, from the equipment as it shows up on site, and inevitably how it then gets to the client. We are using barcodes, or sorry, I should say QR codes, but they're not being done as part of the delivery process. That had too much hair on it because from manufacturer to manufacturer, they have different data sets and barcodes and everything else. So these are being populated at the commissioning phase. We put them on the equipment right next to the manufacturer's the little data plate. So when the guy comes to do service, and I'll show you later the tool that he uses, he has immediate information on that piece of equipment. As part of the design, as part of the construction phase, the contractor is sticking that little sticker on there, and it's about that big. And he's essentially verifying that it's in the room that it's supposed to be, and that it is the manufacturer that was in the initial drawings. Again, BIM 360 is our tool for that. And it gives us the basis for which we can start uploading this information. So more commissioning kind of stuff, size, yeah, if it were a box. So next point is the data harvest, right? We know that as we're going to go as part of this next step, we have all this rich information that's in the model. Now we got to get it out of the model, right? That information is key to making sure that we're going to have the information for the owner so that he can run his building. Simple enough. But as part of that process, we realized that, okay, that commissioning document, right? Now it went from that before to this. So all those data fields are getting populated over time. It's not one guy's job. Everyone has their job to fill in their bits of the fields, right? Designer, engineer, the contractor. So you're doing incremental effort for an exponential return. Incremental effort, exponential return. So this is what's really populating where our as-builts are going, right? Just a quick example. It looks like somebody's veins, well, some robotic veins. That would be the baggage handling system at the airport in Denver. A major fiasco that was originally had to be, I don't know, recovered from, because initially they had this terrific high-speed automated baggage handling system that would literally travel miles with bags. Unfortunately, that They decided to use some local guy because it had to be American-made, and he had never really done it before. He had a mock-up in his backyard and how it was going to be done. And when they built it and put it in place, and it delayed the project a year and a half, it was shooting luggage like rockets all over the place. They shut it down, and they went back to a tug delivery method up to the point where you get to underneath in the terminal where it comes up into your baggage claim and baggage handling areas. So they have since started to revise that. But perfect example of a system key for BIM, right? It's got pieces. They're parametric. We got motors, we got belts, we got rollers. It's simple systems. There's some infrared and barcode detectors, et cetera. Relatively simple, but it has to be working at a high level at all times. Again, what's another one of the things that is going to make the client upset? My bag didn't show up, right? So this has to work at a high level. So when we started developing this process for the client, they said, okay, there's a new international node as part of this baggage handling system, and initially got tremendous pushback from the baggage handling designers. Said, no, we do 3D AutoCAD, don't make us change, this is whatever. Within 2 months' time, after the guys who were doing the work, as opposed to the managers who were telling them don't make us do this, but the guys who were doing the work said, this stuff's great. I can do with my design in half the time. He actually said that in a meeting, and his boss looked at him like, and to that kind of stuff, you say, yes. And I'm not saying half the time, so half the money. There's profit potential in efficiency, right? Either you have your guy doing more work for the same amount of time, or you can do less guys to do the same amount of work, but why would you? So it's sort of self-motivating. So parts and pieces, simple kind of setup, everyone gets it and loves it. So at the end of the day, what we're able to do is take this information and pull it into our asset management system. So now our baggage handling guys are so keen on being able to learn how to put this into Maximo, and we said, well, you don't need to do that. You just give us the Revit file, and we have the link already built in. Like, no, we want to know how to do it. You don't need to. Just do your job the way you're doing it, following the new standards. Incremental effort, exponential return. So just a couple quick examples of, yes, we really have people in the field using cool tools, right? But cool tools these days, iPad, that's old news, right? But guess what? It is the workhorse. And in the airport, of course, we decided, well, we don't like iPads because the IT department doesn't like the way that they handle software, and you have to go through their system. So we did the Windows version. It's a Panasonic ToughPad. Costs $3,000, and it's glitchy and whatever, but we still use it, right? So here's an example of, we were able to take their desktop Maximo licenses. So if anybody's ever used Maximo, it's like Esri that's extremely expensive in the license to license. How are we doing on time? Since we were running behind.
You are our international guest, so.
Wow. I'm going to milk that one. So anyway, much to the chagrin of IBM, we were able to use Wi-Fi and 4G LTE networks to access their licenses from their desktop and not have to pay the $5,000 per seat Maximo Mobile and get full functionality. So, okay, was that sneaky maybe? I don't know. Sort of went around the bend on it. They've since sort of acknowledged, and I'm sure they're going to find a way to kill it later, but these are the ways you can try to leverage what it is you do. So therefore, that superific tablet is just an extension of what the guy was able to do in his office. But now, that particular tablet says, all right, hey, look at these QR codes. What can I do with that? Well, I'm going to be able to enter this stuff in the field. I have the ability to take that iPad or that tablet, and I can scan in the field, and it's going to initiate, essentially it's like a lockout tagout process for doing their work. So instead of the guy starting at the end of the day and says, I've got 4 projects to do maintenance-wise, and I'm going to just take those 4 projects and divide my day divided by 4, 2 hours each, so he doesn't account for going to lunch, he doesn't any other stuff. So the metrics you get back from that guy at the end of the day are no good. Because it could have taken him 5 minutes to do this, 2 hours to do that, but you don't know because, he was kind of, well, let's just say, lazy in the fact that he just wanted to be able to fill out his timesheet. Well, what if you have an instrument like this that's going to give you that information on the fly? And yes, we've had people come up to us and said, will that know where I am? And we say, yes. But guess what? So does that little iPhone, right? It knows where you are. Google knows where you all are, right? So, the libertarian, it's a whole agenda. But the issue is, again, having the ability to use a tool that they already knew how to use, but now they're out in the field, and now it gives them information on the fly, using the same documentation that they were using that they had to be in their office for, but now they're out there in front of the equipment that they need to service, right? They can pull up specifications, all of the information that was populated in those fields that came from the parameters that came from the MEP at Revit, right? Are you starting to see the end game? Right? This is where we're driving. So just a quick example of something. So when we collect information, again, for new stuff, no problem. Existing stuff, so you have to develop some strategies for collecting old information. So conditions assessments are one of those key processes, but don't just make it a snapshot in time. Do it as an information gathering process. So you want to collect the information, right? You're going to say, I'm going to take that passenger loading bridge, which is another one of those key elements. If you can't get from the plane to the airport or from the airport into the plane, you're not a happy camper, and guess what? Neither are the airlines, because they need to churn and burn. They need people getting on and getting off to make money, right? So that has to work. Well, people were treating it like a piece of equipment, sure, but they weren't breaking it down to its subcomponents, so we said, well, why not? Well, it's too hard. Well, what if we do that as part of this process of the conditions assessment? We'll tell you what the major pieces are. We're going to load the information for you. We'll put the little codes on there, and then you'll have the ability to maintain it over time without necessarily having to, write something down, go back to your desk, do all that kind of stuff. Like, okay. Literally, okay. It's not that hard, right? So you standardize the information. It's the same thing that you guys talked about with your own template. You collect that information so that you have so that it's readable from many sources downstream, or upstream for that matter, okay? You know that as you're going to develop this, you're going to be loading more and more data as it goes. If you have a new piece of equipment, you're going to have the manufacturer supply some of that stuff, right? Wouldn't that be great? Now, we all know there's some hair on that because you know that sometimes the manufacturer just wants to dump everything on you. Hell, he's got his web page and his Twitter feeds and everything else in the parameters of his file sometimes. It's ridiculous. So we have to have some détente with manufacturers to make sure that they're only loading the information that needs to be loaded, but it really needs to be developed from a standard that somebody says, this is what we want you guys to give us. Your guys' template is one of the first I've heard of that's starting to do that. Because otherwise the manufacturer goes, I don't know who to listen to, right? So information gets centralized for facility management use, and it essentially gets loaded into, that's the actual passenger loading bridge, into Maximo, right? So at the end of the day, that's our functioning tool for maintaining that asset. So Maximo, in this case, they use it for not only maintaining the assets, but also doing work orders. So like I said, Maximo is like the Swiss Army knife of CMMSs, so it does all kinds of stuff. It does procurement and whatever. I'm just focusing on those particular elements. So at the end of the day, this really becomes that single source of truth, so that next time you do it, you're populating to that same space. So I'm getting to the end. This is my cartoon segue, right? I don't know who the super ninja guy is and why he wants to break into the U.S. Green Building Council building, but he says, okay, well, I have these BIM files, and I'm going to be able to go in and do whatever horrible things he wants to do. So he's following those as-builts to get him to the leader's office, because apparently he doesn't like green building. And unfortunately, Yeah, the as-built didn't led them astray, right? So, again, stupid simple, but the truth is that stuff happens, right? I mean, how many times you chase down a pipe and you find out that it's not even supposed to go in that direction, much less what it's supposed to be conveying. It happens. It really, really happens. So we talk about these as the technological side, right? This is the BIM model, right? And then the linked content and the information management, right? That's the technical stuff. We can handle that fairly well. Where we're challenged, and I'm an architect, okay, and I know there's a fair amount of engineers and other more technically savvy people. Where we're challenged, though, is really in these other elements, right? The collaboration, the coordinated work practices, the institutional cultural framework, because that's behavioral change. But guess what? We have to do that within our own offices, right? We have to get our people to change on how they do stuff. So the implementation of BIM isn't, I'm going to buy it off the shelf and I'm going to plug it right in and I'm going to, and it'll be good, right? I can't tell you how many people said, oh yeah, I downloaded your BIM standards, so we don't need your help. Really? Those are designed for this client over here. Yeah, but I got one. I got a standard. Now I can do stuff. It's oversimplification, right? Nobody, just because you said you have a standard, it's not your standard, and it has to be developed that way. And you have to develop processes. Processes are how things get implemented, right? So you have to find a way to change those processes. For the airport, one of the key pieces was, what do? We need to find someone who's going to be championing this, right? That champion, whether it's the owner or you helping the owner, has to have a plan for which they're going to start to realize their dream, right? Project triage. We call it that because you start with the worst bleeders on a project. Now, if it's a new construction, the whole thing's a bleeder, right? You have to figure out what it is that you need to get done. Maybe it's not quite bleeding yet. But when you have existing stuff, right, what is the most important thing you have to manage? And focus on those things and establish those priorities. Then your goals are established based on what those pieces are going to help you with, right? Systems are my priority, so I'm going to focus on systems. Communications with the team. And that team is mostly ownership, because if you don't have somebody on their side understanding what it is that you're trying to give to them, how are they going to, number one, appreciate it, and number two, understand what to do with it, right? So there's a communication process that's key to this whole element, right? All of that becomes how you establish that risk analysis, not only for your own company and what you're doing, but for that owner and how he's going to receive, use, and manage that information. So at the end, you reestablish what it is you had looked at and said, okay, this is good. Owner, you like it. Contractor, you're on board. Or consultant, you're on board, whoever that may be. And that's where you get to that end process. Most of this stuff is not technical. It's process, it's people, it's communication, right? And I think anyone who's been using this tool knows that you have to communicate to get it to be implemented correctly. The technological part is actually the easiest. That's it.